He didn't remember pouring it. The message on the screen was simple. I can't stop thinking about that night. His shoulders hunched inward as he stared at it. His breathing came shallow and thin through his nose. He tapped the trash can icon. A pop-up appeared asking for confirmation. Delete message? His thumb shook over the button. He closed his eyes for a moment, just a moment, then clicked delete. The message vanished. He moved to the next thread, then the next. His finger moving with mechanical precision through conversations he'd been trying to convince himself didn't exist. The click sound of the phone interface repeated again and again, a sound like small bones breaking. The bedroom door creaked open. Elena stood in the doorway, wearing a white silk robe, the kind she'd stopped wearing months ago. Her pale face was tight with something that wasn't quite anger. Not yet. Her eyes were wide and fixed on him with a terrible clarity. In her right hand, she held a small piece of paper. Folded and refolded so many times it had begun to tear at the creases. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, and the hallway light behind her cast her shadow long across the hardwood floor like a dark blade. Who are you talking to this late, Elias? Her voice was hollow, cold as the grave. Elias flinched so violently that the phone slipped from his fingers and landed on the soft blue duvet with a dull thud. He jerked his thigh over it, pressing down hard, his hands gripping the fabric of his cotton pajama pants as if they might steady him. His face contorted into something that was supposed to be a smile, but looked more like a grimace. His eyes were wide and panicked, the pupils dilated. Just work stuff, he said, his voice coming out too fast, too strained. Checking the schedule for tomorrow. Elena walked toward him, unfolding the yellow sticky note as she moved. She stopped 3 feet away, close enough that he could see the small red lipstick smudge in the upper corner, close enough to read the handwriting. The number was written in black ink, carefully formed, 555-0192. Her hand trembled as she held it out, just barely trembled, but enough that he noticed. Found this in your coat pocket, she whispered. The words came out sharp as a blade. Is this work too? He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. She waited, standing there with the note extended, her eyes never leaving his face. The rain continued its assault on the window. He could taste copper in his mouth. Elias bolted from the bed like he'd been electrocuted. He grabbed his leather jacket from the hallway hook, his fingers scrabbling at the worn leather. The apartment door swung open, and he burst through it into the dim hallway, his breathing ragged and desperate. The hallway light flickered overhead with an electronic hum that made him want to scream. His eyes darted toward the stairwell, searching for an exit, a way out, anything. At the top of the stairs, a man stood waiting. Marcus was large, not just tall but built, the kind of man who took up space without apology. He wore a gray oversized hoodie despite the warmth of the building, and his knuckles were wrapped in tape like a boxer. His face was in shadow, but Elias could see the hard line of his jaw, the aggressive set of his chin. He was punching his open palm with his fist in a slow, rhythmic pattern. Smack, smack, smack. The sound filled the stairwell. My sister's been crying for 3 hours, you coward, Marcus said, his voice gravelly and thick with something between rage and sorrow. Without another word, Marcus lunged. His massive hands grabbed Elias by the lapels of the leather jacket and slammed him hard against the cinder block wall. Elias's head snapped back on impact, and the air exploded from his lungs in a strangled gasp. The fire extinguisher in its glass case on the wall rattled from the force. For a moment, the world went white, and Elias couldn't feel anything except the crushing pressure of this stranger's grip. Survival kicked in. Elias drove his knee up hard into Marcus's stomach. The big man doubled over with a sound like air escaping a punctured tire. Elias swung a wild right hook that connected with Marcus's ear, a meaty, satisfying sound. His knuckles turned red on impact. Marcus's head snapped sideways, and for a moment he seemed stunned. Then Marcus recovered and shoved Elias with the force of a linebacker. Elias flew backward, his body tumbling down the first flight of stairs. His shoulder caught the metal railing with a loud clang that echoed through the building. Pain exploded through him as he landed hard on the concrete landing below. The wind knocked completely out of him. He lay sprawled on the cold floor, clutching his shoulder, gasping like a man pulled from drowning. Marcus stood at the top of the flight, looking down at him. He pulled a small digital camera from the pocket of his hoodie, a Canon, black and compact, and tossed it down. The plastic clattered across the concrete before sliding to a stop just inches from Elias's hand. Marcus wiped blood from his lip with the back of his hand. "She didn't love you," Marcus said, his voice carrying down the stairwell with terrible clarity. "She just wanted the payout." Elias's trembling hand reached out and picked up the camera. He pressed the play button. The LCD screen glowed blue and came to life. His stomach twisted as video playback began. It showed him and a woman named Sarah in a hotel hallway, their bodies close, his hand on her back. The timestamp glowed in the corner. 2 weeks ago. He scrolled to the next file with shaking fingers. This one showed him at a restaurant, handing Sarah his credit card across a table. The camera had zoomed in, so the shot captured his home address on a bill lying nearby. His nausea was physical and immediate. The realization of what this was, not a passionate affair, but a documented trail of evidence, hit him like a second blow. Wind whistled through the building's lobby door somewhere below. A shadow moved in his peripheral vision, but he couldn't focus on it. All he could see was the meticulous documentation of his own destruction. He staggered back to the apartment an hour later. All the lights were on, every switch flipped, casting harsh illumination through the empty space. He ran to the office, the small room with the mahogany desk and the green banker's lamp that had sat there for 5 years. The door was kicked ajar. He knelt behind the desk and saw it immediately. The wall safe was wide open, its black steel door hanging limp on its hinges like a broken jaw. The interior was empty. Dust motes danced in the desk lamplight, but nothing else moved. He reached out with a trembling hand, his fingers groping at the cold metal, and felt nothing but the echo of what had been taken. Inside the safe, he found only 2 items. The first was a divorce petition, its pages thick with legal language, already signed in Elena's careful script. On top of it lay a blue plastic USB drive. He picked up the petition with shaking hands and read the bold text that seemed to scream at him. Petition for dissolution of marriage. His breath hitched. His eyes welled with something that wasn't quite tears. It was too early for tears. It was just shock, raw and absolute. He had to find Elena, had to find her and make her understand. The parking garage was his destination. He clicked his key fob, and the black BMW blinked its lights at him from its spot against the concrete pillar. He was halfway there when he heard it. The roar of an engine, the violent screeching of tires as a silver sedan exploded from a side lane like a predator striking. His body froze in the beam of its headlights. The sedan roared toward him. Elias dove behind the nearest concrete pillar just as the vehicle brushed past his BMW, and the side mirror shattered with a loud plastic snap, metal screaming against metal. Sparks flew from the impact and showered across the oil-stained concrete. The sedan screeched to a halt, and a man in a leather mask jumped out carrying a tire iron, its surface dull with rust. The man's movements were quick and purposeful. This wasn't random violence. This was orchestrated. The tire iron swung at Elias's head. Elias ducked, and the metal connected with the concrete pillar instead, sending out a loud metallic ping that reverberated through the garage. Dust fell from the ceiling in small clouds. Elias was already moving, scrambling on the ground, his hands finding purchase on the rough surface. He grabbed the man's wrist and twisted, pouring everything he had into the movement. His shoulder drove forward into the man's chest, and he shoved him backward toward the sedan's open door. The man stumbled, off balance, and Elias sprinted for the stairwell door. He looked through the reinforced glass with its wire mesh reinforcement, his chest heaving. The man in the garage pulled off the leather mask to wipe his face clean. Elias's disbelief was absolute. The face that emerged was familiar. It was Arthur. Arthur, his business partner of 7 years. Arthur, the man he'd built the company with. The man he'd trusted with everything from board decisions to personal secrets to the combination of the office safe. Arthur, Elias whispered, the word breaking apart in his throat. His hand closed around the USB drive in his pocket. His mind raced through the implications. This wasn't just about Sarah. This wasn't just about the affair or the leverage it provided. Arthur wasn't after his marriage, he was after the company. The affair was theater. Sarah had been an actress hired to create the evidence. Elena had been his co-conspirator, not his betrayed wife, but his enemy. Someone had choreographed all of this with precision and patience, setting the traps so carefully that Elias had walked into every single one without seeing them until it was far too late. The rooftop access door was unlocked. Elias pushed through and emerged into the cold pre-dawn air. The gravel crunched under his feet as he moved across the flat surface. The city stretched out below him in layers of light and shadow, indifferent to his existence. Behind him, the door opened again. Arthur stepped onto the rooftop holding a Glock 17. His movements were calm, almost casual, as if he'd done this 1,000 times before. Elias backed against the knee-high ledge that ran around the roof's perimeter. There was nowhere left to go. The city skyline in the background seemed to lean in, watching. Elena didn't need much convincing once she saw the footage, Elias, Arthur said, his voice conversational and cruel at once. She was already half convinced you didn't love her. Elias rushed him without thinking. The decision was made somewhere in his body before his mind could catch up. Arthur fired, and the bullet grazed Elias's thigh, tearing through fabric and skin. The pain was white-hot and immediate, but the adrenaline was stronger. Elias tackled Arthur, and both men hit the gravel hard. Elias screamed, rage and pain and disbelief all mixed into one primal sound. They wrestled for the gun. Elias slammed Arthur's hand against a ventilation pipe once, twice, a third time. Arthur refused to let go. His fingers stayed locked on the weapon with the determination of a drowning man. Elias bit Arthur's wrist, his teeth sinking into flesh, tasting blood. Arthur's grunt of pain was almost satisfying. Sweat dripped onto the roof as they struggled. 2 men at the edge of ruin, fighting over the instrument of their destruction. Then Arthur kicked. The force of his boot against Elias's stomach sent the wind exploding out of him. Elias rolled backward, his fingers scrabbling at the gravel and finding no purchase. He felt himself rolling toward the edge, toward the precipice, toward the street 23 stories below. His fingers closed on nothing. He was at the very edge when he managed to stop, his hands clutching the concrete lip, his legs dangling over empty air. Arthur stood up, breathing hard. He pointed the gun down at Elias again. His hand was shaking, the barrel wavering as it tracked Elias's face. He was about to fire when the rooftop access door opened again. Elena walked out. She ignored Elias completely, as if he was furniture, as if he was already dead. She walked straight to Arthur and placed one hand on his shoulder, the hand covered in a black leather glove. Her expression was emotionless. Not angry, not satisfied, just blank. She didn't even look at her husband hanging from the edge of the roof. "Don't get blood on your suit, Arthur," she said, her voice deeply chilling. "We have a meeting at 9. The realization hit Elias like a physical force. Sarah wasn't an affair partner. She was an actress, hired months ago by Elena and Arthur, working in perfect synchronization. The lipstick smudge on the note, the documentation on the camera, the evidence so carefully constructed and left for him to find. It had all been a performance, a play with Elias as the unwitting audience, the one who would provide all the emotional reactions that made the story believable. Elena had orchestrated her own betrayal. She had been unfaithful to him with her business partner through layers of deception so elaborate that Elias couldn't even see the edges of the trap. It was all a play? His voice was barely audible, the words broken apart by shock and pain. Elena took the USB drive from his unresisting hand. She dropped her wedding ring onto his chest. It bounced once and rolled into the gravel, the gold catching the early morning light. Arthur pocketed the gun and looked down at Elias one last time. Then he spat on the ground near Elias's head, a gesture of contempt so complete that it required no words. Together, they walked back toward the roof access door. Elena's heels clicked on the concrete threshold. They disappeared inside. Elias lay on the gravel. The sun was fully up now, but it offered no warmth. He looked at the gray sky above him, the clouds moving in lazy patterns across the void. The blood from his wounded thigh had soaked into the gravel, darkening it to nearly black. He had no money. Sarah and Arthur had emptied his accounts. He had no wife. Elena had never been his wife. Or if she had, that version of her had never actually existed. He had no company. By now, Arthur would have transferred the essential files and secured the passwords and made himself indispensable to the board. He had no hope. Hope was a luxury that required some foundation on which to build. Elias had nothing. He was hollowed out, a shell containing only the awareness of his own destruction. A pigeon landed near him, pecked once at something in the gravel, then flew away. Days passed in a blur. He didn't remember how he got down from the rooftop or how he ended up back in the apartment. When he walked through the living room, all the furniture was gone. The couches had vanished, leaving only pale rectangles on the carpet like archaeological marks of what had once stood there. His footsteps echoed in the emptiness. The spaces felt enormous without the weight of objects to fill them. The shadows stretched long across the floor as the sun moved through the windows. In the kitchen, on the counter, someone had left a single item, a half-empty bottle of cheap whiskey and a glass. He unscrewed the cap. The familiar smell rose up to meet him. He didn't bother with the glass. He drank straight from the bottle, and the alcohol burned a path down his throat that felt almost like feeling something real. Later, he didn't know how much later, he found himself sitting on the cold linoleum floor, his back against the cabinets. From his pocket, he pulled out a small digital voice recorder. He pressed the red button. The recording light glowed. He sat there in the silence of the empty kitchen and began to speak. "I thought I was the one who strayed," his voice said flatly into the darkness. "I thought I was the one who broke it. I was just the prey." He took a long drink from the glass he'd finally poured. The divorce papers lay on the counter beside him, the only documents left in the house. He stared at the signature, Elena Vaughn, in her careful practiced script. That signature had been on 17 years of greeting cards, on tax returns, on a mortgage application, on a marriage certificate in a frame on the wall. Now it was the signature on their divorce. "I'm not fighting it," he said into the recorder. His voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. "There's nothing left to heal. I surrender." He set the recorder on the hallway table near the front door. The apartment was completely silent now, a dead thing. His eye caught something on the table, a small white envelope he'd missed somehow in all the chaos. His name was written on it in Elena's handwriting. With shaking hands, he opened it. Inside was an ultrasound photo. The image was blurry, that familiar shape that doctors always pointed to with such joy. On the back, written in Elena's script, "It would have been a girl. Arthur is much more excited than you ever were." There was no reaction in him. No tears came, no rage, no anything. The capacity for emotion seemed to have been drained out of him completely, leaving only a hollow shell that resembled the shape of a man. He stared at the photo for a long moment, then opened his fingers and let it drop. It landed face down on the dusty floor. He opened the front door and walked out into the hallway, leaving the door wide open behind him. His footsteps echoed as he moved toward the elevator, each step separate and distinct in the silence of the building. He didn't look back. Behind him, the empty apartment retreated into darkness, the recorder still playing on the hallway table. 20 minutes of confession to an empty room, evidence of a man who no longer existed.